Without any further stalling on the subject, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Victor Araujo.
Morning, friends. It's a great pleasure to be in Canada again, and as you know, we've been here since Friday, enjoying a good deal of discussion on the Baha'i faith and learning much about Baha'i history. Again, as in the case of David Smith, I'm not sure how to thank Hussein for giving me this assignment. When he first asked me to give the keynote talk for a conference on health and healing, I said, I have nothing to do with health and healing. I mean, my field is English literature. And I said, I'm not professional in the field. So, don't worry. Well, from that point on, I started worrying, so what comes out today, I hope, will make some sense. But certainly at the United Nations, there are many opportunities to see the interest of this world body in the process of health and healing in a variety of ways, and I'd like to talk about a little later, but first I really want to talk about the writings and what I find in the Baha'i teachings regarding health and healing. I'm not going to get into the details that are extremely clear in the article which Dr. Hussein Danesh published in World Order magazine. I think it was the last issue, the one before last, in which all the teachings on health and healing are brought together. But I thought to myself, there are passages in the writings on the divine physician. Baha'u'llah is called the divine physician. There are also prayers for healing, and perhaps it might be a good idea to take a look at these passages in the writings for guidance. This, of course, I'm talking about health in the broadest possible sense, the kind of sense I believe that the manifestation brings to us, because the manifestation of God is concerned in bringing healing to the individual and to humanity as a whole. So, if you excuse a certain amount of quoting this morning, I think it will be well worthwhile, as it always is if we turn to the writings. It brings our minds together, and we perhaps can try to look in a scholarly way and an analytical way at some of the passages or some of the sentences or phrases that we perhaps in using these prayers and these writings become too familiar with, and therefore we reach the point where we don't look at them freshly anymore. It seems to me that we might very well begin with a few passages from Gleanings on the Divine Physician, because those seem to give us the overall framework within which a conference on health and healing could well develop. I feel a little bit like these professors that arrive in class with 10 books, piled one on top of the other, and I always thought they were pretty good props. And I thought, well, here's the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat. but I realized after taking a few courses that those were quite invaluable and pertinent. There is a passage in Gleanings on page 80 in which Baha'u'llah talks about the prophets of God, how the prophets of God should be regarded as physicians whose task is to foster the well-being of the world and its peoples, that through the spirit of oneness they may heal the sickness of a divided humanity. And it seems to me here we have two themes: the fostering of the well-being of the world and its peoples, the concern of the prophets of God as physicians to heal not only the individual but the whole world, and the spirit of oneness as the key, unity as the key for this healing of a divided humanity. Baha'u'llah then says, "To none is given the right to question their words or disparage their conduct, for they are the only ones who can claim to have understood the patient and to have correctly diagnosed its ailments. No man, however acute his perception, can ever hope to reach the heights which the wisdom and understanding of the divine physician have attained." And this is the point at which the Bahá'í, in my understanding, the Bahá'í view of health and healing differs from the view that we find in the world today. Little wonder then if the treatment prescribed by the physician in this day should not be found to be identical with that which he prescribed before. How could it be otherwise when the ills affecting the sufferer necessitate at every stage of his sickness a special remedy? In like manner, every time the prophets of God have illumined the world with the resplendent radiance of the day star of divine knowledge, they have invariably summoned its peoples to embrace the light of God through such means as best befitted the exigencies of the age in which they appear. I think all of us have been struck as we became Baha'is, struck by the relativity of truth. One of the problems in causing blindness in the peoples of the world in receiving new divine messages is this idea that truth is absolute. Truth at a human level is absolute. And as we know as Baha'is, the only absolute truth is with God, the unknowable himself. But when it comes to this level, truth is relative. And therefore, getting back to this idea of science and religion, which was mentioned earlier, it becomes, it seems very clear today that we can see the harmony of science and religion, and we can bring these two into interplay, and that they're no longer at odds, or should no longer be at odds with one another. Then referring to the prophets, they were thus able to scatter the darkness of ignorance and to shed upon the world the glory of their own knowledge. It is towards the inmost essence of these prophets, therefore, that the eye of every man of discernment must be directed, inasmuch as their one and only purpose hath always been to guide the erring and give peace to the afflicted. This is connected with healing. Peace to the afflicted. These are not days of prosperity and triumph. The whole of mankind is in the grip of manifold ills. Strive, therefore, to save its life through the wholesome medicine which the almighty hand of the unerring physician hath prepared. And Abdul-Baha has a very interesting statement in one of his writings, found in the selections of the writings of Abdul-Baha, in which he discusses kinds of healing. He says, there are two ways of healing sickness, material means and spiritual means. The first is by the treatment of physicians. The second consisteth in prayers offered by the spiritual ones to God and in turning to Him. Both means should be used and practiced. Illnesses which occur by reason of physical causes should be treated by doctors with medical remedies. Those which are due to spiritual causes disappear through spiritual means. Thus, an illness caused by affliction, fear, nervous impressions will be healed more effectively by spiritual rather than by physical treatment. Hence, both kinds of treatment should be followed. They are not contradictory. Therefore, thou shouldst also accept physical remedies, inasmuch as these too have come from the mercy and favor of God. And everything, of course, is from the mercy and favor of God. And this seems to be one aspect of human existence that is forgotten in the world today. The idea of this connection, this indissoluble bond, which was mentioned in one of the prayers, between the human being and God. Therefore, thou shouldst also accept physical remedies, inasmuch as these too have come from the mercy and favor of God, who hath revealed and made manifest medical science, so that his servants may profit from this kind of treatment also. Thou shouldst give equal attention to spiritual treatments, for they produce marvelous effects. And now Abdul-Baha ends with this statement: Now, if thou wishest to know the true remedy which will heal man from all sickness and will give him the health of the divine kingdom, know that it is the precepts and teachings of God. Focus thine attention upon them. There are a couple of other passages referring in Gleanings to the divine physicians, which are helpful in our discussion, at least in setting the stage for the discussion that will take place within the next 3 days. One of them is on page 213 of Gleaning, the all-knowing physician. It was quoted the other day by one of the speakers. The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. And this I've always found very interesting. We live in this world at a particular time in civilization, and with particular problems surrounding us, and we are not ascetics. We have an obligation to address ourselves to these problems, as we will be doing in the next few days, and examining what exactly is the contribution that, as Baha'is, we can make to the problems of health and healing in the world today. Baha'u'llah, of course, always enlarges the scope. He's not talking only about the individual, but the whole of humanity. And he says we can well perceive how the whole human race is encompassed with incalculable afflictions. We see it languishing on its bed of sickness, sore tried and disillusioned. They that are intoxicated by self-conceit have interposed themselves between it and the divine and infallible physician. Witness how they have entangled all men, themselves included, in the mesh of their devices. They can neither discover the cause of the disease, nor have they any knowledge of the remedy. They have conceived the straight to be crooked, and have imagined the friend an enemy. And it seems to me that I hear so often diagnosis of the conditions of the world, and sometimes a very clever diagnosis. Somebody mentioned the Club of Rome the other day. And it's true, I recently attended a meeting sponsored by the Club of Rome on development, on the regional development at a regional level. There's a feeling that maybe we should try to attain regional unity before we attain world unity. And there was some very good diagnosis of the conditions in the world today. But somehow, because unless you see with the eye of God and with the eye of the manifestation of God in this day, you cannot really get to the root of the problem. You cannot diagnose correctly. And if you cannot, as Baha'u'llah said, diagnose correctly, how can you know the remedy that is needed? They can neither discover the cause of the disease nor have they any knowledge of the remedy. And then Baha'u'llah enters, incline your ears to the sweet melody of this prisoner. Arise and lift up your voices, that haply they that are fast asleep may be awakened. Say, O ye who are as dead, the hand of divine bounty proffereth unto you the water of life. Hasten and drink your fill. Whoso hath been reborn in this day shall never die. Whoso remaineth dead shall never live. It's, of course, a very powerful statement, and if somebody who were not a Baha'i were to read it, he might think a very exclusive one. But we all know that Baha'u'llah came for the whole of humanity, the whole of mankind. This truth was offered to everybody. There is a passage in one of the prayers and meditations, and this is an idea that has sort of intrigued me for the last few months since I paid attention to what I was reading. I had said this prayer many times, but it hadn't struck. There's a statement in a Prayer and Prayers and Meditation, page 227, it's actually 228, in which Baha'u'llah says, I am he, O my God, that hath clung to the resplendent hem of thy robe, and taken hold on thy strong cord that none can sever. And I think that this idea of the cord that none can sever struck me, because it seems to me that every human being on earth is connected to God. It is simply that there is a condition of unawareness or death, or whatever you wish to call, or maybe of illness, if we're talking about health, that does not permit this awareness to reach the consciousness of the human being. But the cord, the connection is there. And this, again, is related to the indissoluble bond that I mentioned earlier. And then the source, how do we really reawaken this, is explained immediately afterwards by Baha'u'llah, when he says that we have to turn to the Prophet of God, that this is the purpose of our creation, to know God, to recognize the manifestation, and of course, as we know in other passages, after we recognize it, to obey the ordinances, laws, and teachings of the manifestation of God. Here Baha'u'llah says, I testify that thou hast created me, and nourished me, and brought me up, and fed me, and sustained me, that I may recognize him who is the dayspring of thy signs, and the revealer of thy clear tokens. I offer unto thee, therefore, most high praise, O Lord my God, that thou hast suffered me to attain unto this most sublime station and this most august seat. The prayers that I wanted to consider, the three prayers that many of you are familiar with, the healing prayers, the one that begins, Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. And if you consider that Thy name is my healing and remembrance of thee is my remedy, that immediately gives us a sense of direction. It is, of course, connected to this reawakening of awareness that we need to make of the relationship of the human being to God, of the existence, as I said, of a cord that none can sever. We have to, it seems to me, in order to attain health in this day, reawaken ourselves to a realization of this condition of dependence, of contingency, that a human being is not, as many humanists believe, self-subsisting, but only God is. And therefore that the individual must rely on the Creator, on the manifestation of the Creator in the world of existence for guidance, for two things, for guidance and for power. And I think the second is very important. You notice how many times in the writings there's a reference to God as the all-powerful, the idea of power. And there's a very interesting statement in one of prayers, in Prayers and Meditation, in which Baha'u'llah says that the highest point of wisdom that any person, any human being can attain is a confession of powerlessness. The confession of powerlessness is the greatest point. That is the emptying, total emptying of self, the total submission of one's will to the will of God, because then you can be filled with the creative power of God, the source of healing. But if we proceed, for instance, looking at some of these prayers, the idea of the name, Thy name is my healing, O my God, remembrance of Thee is my remedy, the constant injunction in the writings that we praise God, therefore, and that we remember God, that we meditate when we arise in the morning before we go to bed at night. And then there is, towards the end of this prayer statement, Thou art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise, these qualities, these attributes of God. It's a way, as we are told, that the human being, the best way the human being, within the limitations of language, can express the greatness of the Creator. But in the other prayer, which we are familiar with, there are several elements that I think if we talked about them for a few minutes might be helpful in the context of this conference. This is the one that begins, O God, my God, I beg of Thee, by the ocean of Thy healing, and by the splendors of the day star of Thy grace, and by Thy name through which Thou didst subdue Thy servants, and by the pervasive power of Thy most exalted word, and the potency of Thy most august pen, and by Thy mercy that hath preceded the creation of all who are in heaven and on earth, to purge me with the waters of Thy bounty from every affliction and disorder, and from all weakness and feebleness. Thou seest, O my Lord, Thy suppliant, waiting at the door of Thy bounty, and him who has set his hopes on Thee, clinging to the cord of Thy generosity. Deny him not, I beseech Thee, the things he seeketh, from the ocean of Thy grace, and the day star of Thy loving kindness. Powerful art Thou to do what pleaseth Thee. There is none other God save Thee, the ever forgiving, the most generous. If we look at some of the elements of this prayer, for instance, purge me with the waters of Thy bounty, from what? From every affliction and disorder. And I think particularly it's interesting the word disorder here, because if you recall that the key spiritual law of Baha'u'llah is a spiritual law of unity, disorder is essentially disunity. And if we, of course, read the talk of Abdu'l-Baha on eternal unity, we can get a very clear idea that from the limited forms of unity we end up in the at the point of the oneness of God. There is one point only, and that is God, and everything emanates from God. But this disorder, this disunity, is then what the Universal House of Justice told us is the fundamental problem of our time. And in one of the, incidentally, in not exactly in the terms that I'm discussing this with you today, but in a different way, we are trying to convey to people, prominent people at the United Nations, some of these ideas. For instance, the idea of disunity. In this brochure that has just been republished, One World, One People, which incidentally was used widely at the Human Settlements Conference a few years ago in Canada, in Vancouver, Canada, at which our delegation, in which our delegation was made up mostly from members of the Bahá'í community, with the Canadian Bahá'í community with great success. We said at the beginning of this pamphlet, when in the last century Baha'u'llah, prophet founder of the Bahá'í faith, addressed the kings and rulers of the world, he warned that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is truly established. Unfortunately, most people even today consider unity, quote, as an ultimate, almost unattainable goal, and concentrate first on remedying of all other ills of mankind, end of quote. However, quoting again, if they did but know it, these other ills are but various symptoms and side effects of the basic disease, disunity. And this, again, is related, of course, to the idea of disorder in this particular prayer. Then, continue with this prayer with the idea of weakness and feebleness, the human condition, for instance, and the divine power. These two always place side by side. And right at the beginning, the prayer reminds us of the ocean of thy healing. And I wonder how often we read the word ocean without thinking about the vastness of the ocean, in the sense of the power, the size, the immensity of the ocean, how all-encompassing, all-engulfing an ocean is to our eyes as we see it. And if we think of that in terms of its relationship to the ocean of thy healing, if the manifestation of God then is the ocean of healing, this is the power that exists, the splendors of the day star of thy grace. Again, the power of the ocean and the power of the sun, the immensity of light and heat, for instance. And the fact that in this prayer it says, subdue by thy name through which thou didst subdue thy servants. Reminding us of our position vis-a-vis the creator of the universe. And then the ideas of the pervasive power of the most exalted word of the manifestation of God, the idea of potency of the most august pen. All these are ways of conveying to us from where this source of health and healing comes. Also the idea of mercy. So often we hear that the mercy of God precedes the creation of everything that was. This idea of bounty too, the suppliant waiting at the door of thy bounty, bounty of God. The idea of clinging again to the cord, to the generosity of God. And finally, at the end of the prayer, the idea of ocean, again, the return of these images of ocean of thy grace, the source of water. Water has always been a form of purification, a symbol of purification, and the day star of thy loving kindness, and the source of, again, the light of heat, also a form of purification. And after all, purification is related to a condition of health and healing. This is a condition that we wish to reach, as a condition of purity. The third prayer, which I will not read, is the prayer for handmaidens. And it's very interesting that it refers to the name of God through which thou changest all things, the idea of alchemy. So often in the prayers of Baha'u'llah you have this idea that dissolution of the world, of the former stage of creation, and the recreation of something entirely new. It's not a synthesis, something entirely new. As if you got down to the basic elements again, and the manifestation of God recreates everything. And through it thou changest all things, thou gatherest together all things, this unifying power of the manifestation, callest to account all things. The point of dissolution and creation, there's a rebirth, there's a test, a new beginning. Rewardest all things. We know the idea of justice as a central idea in the Baha'i faith. Preservest the protection of the individual within the covenant of Baha'u'llah, and always within the covenant of the Prophet, founder of religion. And the sustainest all things, providing with the necessary strength. These are some of the images that we find in this other one. And there's one other point that I'd like to make, and appears in this particular prayer. I think it's very interesting. Struck me, and it struck Betty as very interesting. One day, the idea of abhorrence, for instance, the idea of forgiveness. The prayer says that this handmaiden is sick. She will enter beneath the shadow of the tree of thy healing. Again, the image of the tree of life, which is, again, a manifestation of God, tree of healing. Afflicted, she's fled to the city of thy protection, and we know the city is the city of God, and you've read about that in the Kitab-i Gan. Diseased, she sought the fountainhead of thy favors, the fountainhead of the place where the waters come from. The sorely vexed, the wellspring of tranquility, the word tranquility, for instance, there. And then finally, burdened with sin, and sets her face towards the court of thy forgiveness. And there is this connection always between the physical and the spiritual condition. The physical and spiritual balance must be maintained. If the forgiveness is a form of purification, because it is again let's say, setting us again in the right path. We have the guidance from the manifestation of God, and as I understand, if we go astray, as Ruhiya once pointed out, we pick ourselves up and keep going, But this is a form of redirection. But again, the question always comes up: how in tune are we, as human beings, with the purpose of life? To know the manifestation of God and to obey the laws and ordinances of the manifestation. How intensely do we cling to this cord that none can sever? How intensely are we aware all the time of this particular cord? And the prayer begins with the ideas of the request, the plea that this handmaid should be attired with the raiment of thy balm and thy healing, to quaff of the cup of thy mercy and thy favors. Again, and should be protected from every affliction and ailment, from all pain and sickness. And finally, this again at a physical level, but from whatsoever may be abhorrent unto thee, which takes us back to the idea of setting a face towards the court of the forgiveness of God, the two elements, this balance. And the names of God at the end, immensely exalted above all else except thyself, who is the healer, this all-sufficing God as the healer, the all-sufficing, the preserver, the ever-forgiving, the most merciful. I'm sorry to have dwelt this long on these prayers, but I thought it's very interesting if we start thinking about the guidance that we have in the prayers that we say. I was aware many years ago when Betty was going through a very difficult surgery. We didn't know exactly how serious it was, and I was using the healing prayers. That suddenly what I was praying for was something that was extremely spiritual. It had a dimension that wasn't really physical. And there is always in these the prayers the healing, the true healing begins at an entirely different dimension, the dimension that transcends the physical and our present conditions. And because it has to do with the strength that the prayers, I would assume, endue the human soul as we use them. It is quite evident that as we work with the United Nations, we haven't got to the point yet that we can, except in individual conversations with people, to talk about this particular point of view. But we can convey to people at the United Nations, and have done so, this concept of the organic oneness of mankind. And in this particular pamphlet, One World, One People, after quoting the Candles of Unity of Abdu'l-Baha, we try to make a point about the Baha'i perspective on the solution of a number of problems, social and economic problems with which the UN is concerned. And we said, from a Baha'i perspective, new moral and spiritual standards are needed today to resolve the interlocking economic and social problems of our planet. And these can rest on one foundation only: the consciousness in each individual of the organic oneness of humanity. And the question is, how do you explain, well, how do we understand the organic oneness of humanity? Again, only going to the teachings and trying our best to understand what Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah tell us. We went on to say, we are not only citizens of our native land, but beyond that, of the whole world. We are part of the ecosystem, but it is from our inner world that come the all-encompassing values and attitudes which provide us with understanding, will, and power. The two things, understanding, will, and power to raise the spiritual and physical quality of life of all peoples. And this is what we're talking about in the whole process of health and healing, the basis. This conviction by the individual and society of the essential unity of the human race is the only viable standard today for social and economic justice. On it must depend the successful solution of the problems of environment, human settlements, population, food, health, employment, etc. It means briefly, and this is a passage from Abdu'l-Baha's The Secret of Divine Civilization, to consider the welfare of the community as one's own, to regard humanity as a single individual, and one's own self as a member of that corporeal form, and to know of a certainty that if pain or injury afflicts any member of that body, it must inevitably result in suffering for all the rest. This is something, it seemed to me, that can be explained to many people. At least we can try to explain. But to give the dimension, to give the feeling of what the manifestation of God does in the world when He comes, to give a feeling and an understanding that really when the manifestation of God comes, a new stage of civilization emerges, that we often explain to people at the United Nations, and that really the way we look at the UN is that this is an indirect reflection of the spirit of unity which Baha'u'llah brought in the middle of last century, and this has pervaded the whole of creation. And there are those who respond to this, even in a limited way, and those who turn away from it. But every movement going towards global unity, world unity, is a force that has responded, or is an institution or an organization that has responded. And the United Nations, in this sense, is in the spirit of the age when it tries to deal with global problems of the planet. And they are dealing with a number of global problems. Perhaps I could talk a little bit now about some of these global problems they're trying to resolve, some of the areas of the UN which deal directly or indirectly with health. For instance, the most well-known entity at the UN that deals with health is, of course, the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is a specialized agency of the UN. Recently, you probably read in the newspaper that after many years, the WHO was able to eradicate smallpox from the planet. It is engaged in a number of healing processes, or processes having to do with health throughout the world, this at a global level. And I'd like to share with you a few passages from the Constitution of WHO to give you an idea to what degree the UN and its organizations are tuning in to the needs of the total person and the needs of the whole of humanity, the whole human society. Incidentally, afterwards I'll be very happy to leave these publications some place where you might take a look at them. There's some that deal with UNICEF, some with WHO. WHO, for instance, has recently put out a special issue on smoking. They have a Smoking or Health, the choice is yours. And this is very interesting because they've decided the tremendous damage that is being done to people through smoking, and this last World Health Day had as its theme, Smoking or Health, the choice is yours. And it's, of course, dealing with many other problems too. But from the Constitution of WHO, here are some passages. Health, for instance, they say, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. But notice, physical, mental, and social, spiritual and moral is not mentioned. It may be indirectly included in social. It's often at the UN included in cultural. Then they say the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic and social condition. The health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. The achievement of any state in the promotion and protection of health is of value to all. The interrelationship of all areas on the planet, all peoples, all nations. Unequal development in different countries in the promotion of health and control of disease, especially communicable diseases, is a common danger. Now you can see what this concept of the organic oneness of mankind gradually creeping in. Health, development of the child is of basic importance. The ability to live harmoniously in a changing total environment is essential to such development. The extension to all peoples of the benefits of medical, psychological, and related knowledge is essential to the fullest attainment of health. Informed opinion and active cooperation on the part of the public are of the utmost importance in improvement of the health of the people. And finally, governments have a responsibility for the health of their peoples, which can be fulfilled only by the provision of adequate health and social measures. Now, for many years, the WHO has been working steadily in this field and has been a very constructive force. Now, it's not only WHO, but the Food and Agricultural Organization, for instance, is very interested in areas that affect health. Now, of course, the provision of adequate supplies of food to peoples of the world is adequate, is essential to good physical health and mental health. Here's a question. Nutrition is a question of philosophy in the official organ of the FAO series. And nutrition is one of the concerns of WHO. However, the other concern of providing enough food for the peoples of the world at this moment is more pressing, and therefore exactly what kind of nutrition is best, what kind of balanced diet has to take a second place. But it is one of the concerns of FAO. The United Nations Environment Program, for instance, is basically concerned with the health of the peoples on the planet. They have the organization now is located in Nairobi. They are concerned with the pollution of the seas and oceans of the world. They have recently concluded an agreement to curb the pollution and clean up the Mediterranean, for instance. And they're doing all kinds of things in a variety of areas. There are all kinds of pollution, all kinds of imbalances between the human being and nature. When the Baha'i international community participated in a special special World Conference on Environment in 1972, we had an opportunity to present a pamphlet which many of you have seen, Environment and Human Values. And in this pamphlet, we again tried to suggest one of the dimensions of the environment that really should be considered. And we have a section on the foundation of human values, for instance, in which we say, strangely, religion, which has traditionally been the area of human experience most centrally connected with human values and the definition of man's purpose, is seldom considered in the search for solutions to current world problems, such as those of the human environment. Yet religion, in the broadest sense, has not been static. New teachers, new movements have come many times in human history, providing new social and cultural directions for man. The major religions in particular have succeeded, at least for a time, in unifying many disparate elements into a common social force based on a common set of values. Today our need is similar. A lack of understanding or agreement between men at the most basic level, their goals and purposes, undermines attempts at comprehensive and long-range solutions. And that's the key that's why so many of these diagnoses if they provide a solution, they're only temporary and partial solutions. Because it's this matter of getting an understanding of the goals and purposes of human beings. Undermines attempts at comprehensive and long-range solutions to specific world problems, whether environmental, political, economic, or social. And then we say man's predicament was foreseen over 100 years ago by Baha'u'llah, prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. Through his writings, which Baha'is believe have divine authority and power, he gave mankind a plan for achieving the human understanding and world order necessary to reform and unify human society. Many of the principles established by Baha'u'llah have immediate application to the problems of the human environment. In fact, the great majority of current world difficulties can be traced to our failure to observe the spiritual and moral standards and to apply the social concepts set down by Baha'u'llah, some of which are outlined below. And then we mentioned an ever-advancing civilization, harmony of science and religion, oneness of mankind, unity and diversity, world order, a world economy, social justice, universal education, and, of course, moderation. Again, as you see, these conferences, the passages from this pamphlet, One World, One People, from which I quoted earlier, was used not only at the Human Settlements Conference in Vancouver, it was used at the World Food Conference in Rome, where we were represented in the World Population Conference in Bucharest, in both of these in 1974, and therefore, and it reached the hands of many, many people. Now, I can't tell you whether people read it or pay attention, but certainly we're trying to contribute the Baha'i answer in a very sharing way, hoping that people will respond, because the faster they respond, the faster we can have complete health in the world. Now, there are other areas of the UN which I think I just mentioned briefly. These are just simply highlights in which you're probably familiar. UNICEF, for instance, is very interested in this whole process of primary health care. In fact, the Baha'i international community is represented at a conference in Russia, in Alma-Ata, Russia, on primary health care. It was co-sponsored by UNICEF and WHO. We were invited to be there. For the first time, non-governmental organizations were placed on the same level with delegates from governments with the right to make contribution. And our delegate, Dr. Alfred Newman, made a contribution at one of these workshops, which was later incorporated in the proceedings. It was on the management of health care and so forth. From his expertise, he was able to make a contribution. UNICEF has a booklet called Health, A Time for Justice, this again gives you an idea of the concern of the UN. The justice and health are vital. And what they mean by primary health care is they say essential health care made accessible to everyone in the country. Care given in a way acceptable to individuals, families, and the community, since it requires their full participation. Health care provided at a cost the community and the country can afford. And now, all Baha'is are aware of universal participation, that every Baha'i is a part of the community and must make a contribution to the community besides the world, the Baha'i community besides the world as a whole. It's very interesting, this new approach to health care is not just imposing the views of some experts or taking experts to some place to resolve all the problems, but getting everybody involved in a given area. The UNICEF has this basic services concept now, which is precisely that. They go into an area and try to train people and provide them with all the help they can, and then the experts will leave and the people there will hopefully carry on. And the UNICEF says that the primary healthcare approach forms an integral part of the country's healthcare system, of which it is the keystone, and of the overall social and economic development of the nation and the community. And it's very interesting that we who have worked closely with the United Nations see a change occurring there. At the beginning, there was a feeling that all these development problems could be solved at an economic level. Then they found out that doesn't work. You have to have social reforms. So the social elements is included, the cultural. You have to have political will. They simply haven't reached a point, although in the back of their minds it's beginning to perk, that the spiritual and moral dimension is the foundation of all these problems. And they're beginning to talk about the change of attitudes, the change of values that is necessary for any of these development schemes to succeed. And in fact, it's fascinating that recently the United Nations has declared development to be a right. The right to development. Of course, they think of it maybe primarily in economic and social terms, but Baha'is have a wonderful time redefining the right to development. It's the development of the total individual as we conceive him to be. So again, here's something else. UNICEF is concerned with nutrition, child nutrition, an issue. The training of women in health care. These are some of the areas in which they're becoming involved. UNICEF is becoming involved in the International Year for the Disabled next year, in the disability of children. Very much concerned now with aiding as much as possible, but going to making use of the family, making use of the community, changing the attitudes of these people so that there's a minimum of impediment placed in the way of the full growth of a disabled person, whatever disability it happens to be, so that all these prejudices don't stand in the way, or they don't get shunted off to one side, where they become part of the total development of the family, of the individual's family, and of the community in which he or she lives. You can see these are all Baha'i ideas that are reaching, that because of the spirit of the age and because of the power of the revelation of Baha'u'llah are coming to be accepted by other people. The source is not accepted, and this is and as we know, the lasting any lasting solution has to take into account an awareness of the source and an awareness of this cord that none can sever. There is a great deal more I could tell you about, but Perhaps